Welcome to Live Oak Unitarian Universalist Congregation. I'm Dee Hamlin, and I serve as a member of Live Oak's Board of Trustees. This morning, Worship Associate Holly Cook will join Reverend Melitta Haslund in leading our worship service. Reverend Melitta Haslund is a Unitarian Universalist minister, an on-call chaplain at Cottage Hospital, and a professor of comparative world religions at Santa Barbara City College. She is also a longtime friend of Live Oak, having known us since our inception. She is the daughter of Peter Haslund and the daughter-in-law of our minister emerita, Beth Swinicky. She and her husband, Bill Gorley, live in Santa Barbara with their daughter, Alexandra, who attends San Marcos High School. Their son, Benjamin, has recently moved into a dorm at UCSB, where he attends the College of Creative Studies in Biochemistry. We're glad that you're with us this morning. In this liberal religious community, we welcome all. Our generations join together to nourish spiritual growth and personal transformation, that we may be inspired to transform the world with love, hope, compassion, and justice. After worshiping together, we make time for coffee, tea, and conversation on the patio. And we take the opportunity to reach out to new acquaintances. And if you are new to us this morning, please make yourself known, and others reach out to our visitors today to welcome new seekers in our midst. Everyone is encouraged to read the Acorn Bulletin, which highlights the many ways that we create fellowship and put our values into action. Let us begin worship together.
Well, happy birthday, so many of you. I am so pleased to be with you this morning. I'm kind of in the in-between stage of reading glasses, but I like to look at you, so I'll be doing this a lot, I think. And I'm so glad you've called such a wonderful minister. Wonderful. Congratulations. Good person. For more than a year, I have had the pleasure of teaching comparative. It's much better when I put this on. I've had the pleasure of teaching comparative world religions at Santa Barbara City College. The first day, I always invite the students to stand up and share with me and everyone else their name and why they're taking this course. And usually, it's to create peace, to understand. And we were ambling along cordially when one student stood up and said, "I know that religion has separated us throughout the centuries and has caused more evil than good. Religion and religions are an excuse for war." He sat down to utter silence. It was said more as a dart blown to the instructor, who he assumed would naively love everything about religion, and class looked to me for its response. I have to admit, I wasn't prepared for that point, not at that point. Usually those kinds of sentiments would come out in the anonymous questionnaire. But his anger was palpable and legitimate in lots of ways. But there was something there behind it, I felt. Almost a plea to show him that he wasn't altogether correct. I thanked him for his honesty and told him I was glad he was taking the class. I had to agree. Wars have been waged with a God who apparently was on both sides, and thousands of people have lost their lives. Religion is often used as a lethal and political weapon to rationalize devastating brutality and dehumanization. And, I said, I hope we can discover aspects of world religions that do not espouse, support, or legitimate violence. He would have to be the judge of that at the end of the semester. This challenge has stayed with me, and in many ways the younger generations look to us to show them that there is reason for hope, reason based on reality and not fanciful thinking. Of course, we hear lots of jokes about religion, and here's one I can tell in a pulpit. A priest, a minister, and a rabbi want to see who's best at his job. Sorry for the word his, or hers, but these are three guys. So each of them go into the woods to find a bear and attempt to convert it. Later they get together. The priest begins, well, when I found the bear, I read to him from the catechism and sprinkled him with holy water, and the next week is his first communion. Well, I found a bear by the stream, said the minister, and I preached God's words, holy words, and the bear was so mesmerized that he let me baptize him. And then they both looked down at the rabbi, who was on a gurney and a body cast. And he said, looking back, maybe I shouldn't have started with the circumcision. Okay, it's a cheesy joke. And of course we know there are so many ways we hear about religion in negative manners. We hear about Palestine and Israel exchanging violence that kills young people. We hear about the brutality in Syria and that new group, ISIS or ISIL, that inconceivably beheads people. And our thoughts go to the 300 girls who I hope will be released soon. We see a rise in intolerance and incivility all around the world. We are inundated with fearful news about violence based on religious conviction. Or then we also hear about the numbingly nonsensical information that we hear that Kim Kardashian's wardrobe has failed again. Or that with the Mars Curiosity rover that there are donuts or guns on Mars. Did you see those? News. I'm not sure what depresses me more when I hear mainstream news on television. Is it the fear and utter lunacy with little attempt to intelligently understand the components that lead to conflicts that are all too often based on religious fundamentalism and misinterpretation? If that is all there is to religion, then my student is right. But, and there is always a but, my stubborn Unitarian Universalism arises, overcoming futile thinking, devoid of information and hope. First, let's look at the etymology of the word religion. It comes from Latin, and it means that which binds us or gives reference to life. It's what holds us together throughout life, the crises and the beauty, all of it. In some cases, it can be like bondage that oppresses us. But for the sake of this sermon, let's see religion as something that has potential to hold us together and guide us well throughout life, as a civilizing force. Freud once said, the first human who hurled an insult instead of a stone was the founder of civilization. So, that's in keeping with what we all learned in kindergarten. Use your words. In the midst of this often misinterpreted adherence to any religion in a fundamentalist, narrow-minded, ignorant, death-tolling sort of way, there are many examples where religion strives toward compassion, respect, harmonious community, tolerance, and civility. We heard it in our lovely hymn this morning, and thank you. Speaking of civilization, once again, as homeowners, we probably received our recent property tax bill this year. And I urge you to consider this rather refreshing and civic-minded wisdom from American jurist Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., who said, I like to pay taxes. With them, I buy civilization. I like that. Happily, let us buy civilization, or at least hope that our funds go towards that goal. My favorite professor in divinity school, Katie Geneva Cannon, taught about the dance of redemption, a process of liberation. One of the most critical steps was a very fancy term I loved hearing her say, emancipatory historiography. You kind of dance with that. It's rooted in future strategic action based upon research of history, understanding the particular historical roots of whatever oppression one is trying to plan to do something about. She also said that we needed to hold it all in tension, to not polarize, just to simplify things, but hold it all the gray areas. And so that, I think, is what we need to do when we approach religion. Likewise, a more recent development in our Unitarian Universalist circles is the desire to share our stories when we do social justice, not as entertainment. I led this, or co-led, a part of a conference called Walking Our Talk a few years ago. Instead of debating one another with the merits of my social justice project over yours, the idea was for us to listen deeply to each other's stories about why each particular issue meant so much to us, like from our personal experience. It brought a quality of depth and connection that had been lacking. So doing our homework, digging into the history of conflicts and into our own stories, and then hearing others' stories makes a powerful bridge-building elixir. Armed with knowledge and compassion, life takes on a different shape, one that bears hope. So as a storyteller, let's look at the religious experience and philosophy that might be forgotten or overlooked when we are so polarized and fear-ridden. I recently attended a disaster preparedness forum, and Wilma was there as well, representing Live Oak. It was to build faith-based community partnerships so that we are better prepared for disasters. There were many fine speakers, and one of them was David Myers, who is a Mennonite minister and the director for the Department of Homeland Security's Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. He was selected by President Obama for his amazing work with homeless youth in Chicago. And he had a remarkable story to share about a small town, Tuscaloosa in Alabama, which was hit in 2011 with a powerful tornado, which killed dozens of people and laid waste to much of their town. But 2 years prior to that tornado, the city had been experiencing a great increase in crime, and the mayor tried to alleviate that. He tried to squelch it, but every time he did so, it would increase. He put more people on the force, it would increase. So nothing seemed to be working, and he finally turned to doing something he had seen other communities doing, and that was called a Hope Initiative. And among other proposals, which included greening the space that they were looking at and providing mental health support, the mayor reached out to interfaith communities, and 50 religious leaders stood up and came forward. Jewish communities, Muslim communities, Christian communities, black and white, churches came together. They began walking the streets and getting to know each other. They started a soup kitchen, a neighborhood watch, and coordinated street cleanups. Normally divided and focused upon their own little concerns, the congregations began to know one another and care for one another, and to know and care about the larger community. Drawing from their own faith, principles, and scriptures, each contributed, making the streets safer and lives more fulfilled, and crime went down significantly. Myers went on to describe what happened after the devastating tornado. In this position, he has traveled all around our country to human-made disasters and natural disasters, but he learned, he said, the most from Tuscaloosa, These faith-based communities, already strong from working together and building alliances, pivoted their focus to helping those who suffered the most. Congregations' basements became shelters. Other congregations became the collection sites for supplies and clothing. Still others were the kitchens where food was prepared. They interfaced well with their emergency manager and federal government agencies when they arrived. But what made all the difference was what they had already created. Strong bonds between people acting from the depths of their religious convictions, breaking barriers with love to create a more healthy, vibrant community. In fact, they have just held a day of hope in September, where they built ramps for people in wheelchairs, where they upgraded a dangerous playground and they replaced doors for people. Tuscaloosa offers an incredible example of the power of faith, interfaith work. And I know here in Santa Barbara, we have many clergy members who get together regularly. In fact, we have the eco-faith projects which green our sanctuaries. So in studying world religions, religion often appears as a response to turmoil. If you look back at the history of each major world religion, you'll see there was some sort of turmoil and transformation is sought. Religious historian Karen Armstrong puts it quite simply, that major world religions discovered that one needed to divest oneself of egotism, of greed, envy, and hatred. The key was to exercise compassion. For Buddhism, it was Siddhartha's quest to understand the nature of human suffering. And because he was so compassionate, he sought ways of liberating us from suffering. He drew upon Hinduism, but he went beyond the oppressive caste system and the cycle of samsara, of birth and life and rebirth, where we are likely, at that point, Hindus had to live practically thousands of years or lifetimes in order to reach the Brahmin highest level, caste level. Then they could go to nirvana. Instead, through discipline and insight and following along the eightfold path of awareness, one could potentially arrive at liberation from suffering in one lifetime. That was huge, because the lower caste systems were horribly oppressed. And he welcomed everybody from all parts of the caste system, and both men and women. And then he created a sangha, or a community, consisting of nuns and monks and lay people, which supported each other in their quest towards enlightenment. It was within a supportive religious community, he felt, that humanity could work towards becoming fully enlightened. Meanwhile, at just about the same time, China, all of their traditions had broken down, and they were in huge, brutal chaos where thousands were slaughtered. Religious scholar Houston Smith notes that Confucius, who was born around the same time as Buddha, addressed the problem, how do we keep from destroying ourselves? His answer was a moral philosophy rooted in deliberate tradition. Zen, or benevolence, was what was at its core. He drew inspiration from China's golden age, and Zen was the virtue of virtues. It was courtesy, unselfishness, empathy. It was knowing deeply that within the four C's, all men or people are brothers and sisters. In his view, we exist only in community, and our goal in life was to become fully human. He based his thought on concentric circles ebbing out, beginning with the self, learning about virtue, beginning with the family, learning about respect, and then taking that out into the larger community and finally to the universe. He was, as far as scholars can tell, the one who said, first, do not do to others as you would not have done unto you. 500 years before Jesus. This, Confucius said, was his religion. That's much like what Rabbi Hillel said, an elder contemporary of Jesus, who in the Talmudic story is asked by a prospective convert to Judaism to teach him the whole Torah while he stood on one leg. Hillel stood on one leg and replied, "That which is hateful to you, do not do unto your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Go forth and study." Confucius was fortunate. He finally found a prince who would let him kind of have a little territory, and he became governor. And for 5 years, this community where he served was prosperous, was peaceful, was respectful. And actually, the princes around this prince in different areas were threatened. And so, sadly, they sent over dancing women, it's always dancing women and 100 horses that really took his concentration off of what they were doing together and really abandoned Confucius. And so he spent years after that wandering around China trying to get other leaders to follow his recommendations. But it said that during those 5 years, he glowed with hope. Very tragically, Islam is always almost depicted as being the source of terrorism and violence today, when in fact the Quran insists that there be no compulsion in religion and that all rightly guided religion comes from God. Karen Armstrong notes that according to Quran scholars, that if they had known about the Eastern religions or those of the Aborigines or American Indians, they would have also said that those were their prophets as well. But to be Muslim, one must accept the prophets, Adam, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Before he died, Muhammad quoted the Quran 49:13. "O mankind, indeed, we have created you from male and female and made you the peoples and the tribes that you may know one another." To know one another, to really know someone, is to understand someone, to see them for their unique and inherent worth and dignity, to put a you spin on it. To know someone is to extend compassion and caring to them. There are lots and lots of examples of compassion which drew and has drawn religions together to do the right thing, to act out of compassion. Here's a final example. In Africa, maybe you've heard of the term Ubuntu. I am because of you, is what it means. Nelson Mandela is said to have embodied this. In his words, long ago when a traveler would come around to different parts of South Africa, they wouldn't have to ask for food or water or shelter. It would just be given as a matter of course. There are many aspects of Ubuntu: helpfulness, sharing, community, caring, trust, unselfishness. In Mandela's words, Ubuntu does not mean that people should not enrich themselves. The question, therefore, is, are you going to do so in order to enable the community around you to be able to improve? The axial sages and ones among us today insist that everyone needs to extend our concern beyond ourselves, beyond our families, beyond our countries, to encompass the entire earth. Karen Armstrong reminds us that when Muhammad heard the voice of God, he sweat. He would sometimes faint. He couldn't breathe. It was so powerful. And she says we need to invoke that hard work when we do this kind of work for compassion. It is not easy, always. It will take prophetic imagination, to use the words of Walter Brueggemann, to step out of the norm of distractions like our cell phones and TV and the distrust, out of the disintegration and into envisioning new ways of embracing the reality of a global community. And so, we return to my student's question or assertion. Religion has separated us throughout centuries and has caused more evil than good. Religions are an excuse for war. My answer? Yes and no. How very you of me, right? We must hold it all in tension instead of turning it into polarization. Religion has certainly been and continues to be very badly used and misunderstood and rationalized for violence. At the same time, religions have also been human responses to brutality and civic chaos. Again and again, prophets from different ages in their particular religious languages have proclaimed similar messages of hope, of compassion, of the golden rule, of reaching for liberation not alone for ourselves, of knowing that we are all sacred creatures, fallible and lovely all at once. And so we find our sources of hope, deep wells from which to draw inspiration to keep on in the spirit of sages. Or, as a mentor of mine, Marjorie Newland Leeming, used to say, to keep muddling along. So may it be. Amen. With these words from Marjorie Newland Leeming, let us go forth into the world through a door of hope for the future, remembering these words by Martin Luther. Even if I knew that tomorrow the world would go to pieces, I would still plant my apple tree. Amen.